God is a miracle working God. And we can't force his hand to do miracles for us, but that doesn't change the fact that he does do them, even in impossible circumstances. And so in this short video, I'm going to share a story where I saw God do something miraculous. And then I'm also going to link to a video at the end of this one where I'm going to share from the Bible, seeing Jesus do something amazingly miraculous in the middle of awful circumstances, as well as a story from my own life where I saw God move miraculously. And then I also share at the end of that video a time of just prayer and meditation, leading you in a reflection on this very topic. I hope you'll join me there. And I also invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video so you can hear more encouragement if it touches you, and others can too. Okay, so now to the story. I was at the Sundance Film Festival with some friends. We had taken a class on biblical dream interpretation. And, if that's new to you, I'll just say this. Both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, we see that God speaks in dreams. And we see through the patterns of Scripture that he speaks in symbols, metaphors, and puns. And when we apply that principle to our dreams and also to our visions, we can actually begin to understand what God says through them. So we had taken this class on doing this, and we went to the Sundance Film Festival because we just felt led to go there and see if we might be able to reach people through dream interpretation and hopefully end up in conversations about Jesus. So we're in this near store, I'll just say that, and I saw this woman in front of this store, and I'll call her Sarah. She looked like she was drunk. And I wasn't sure that we should approach her because I didn't know how a conversation was going to go, but I really felt like we were supposed to. And in fact, when we started the conversation, I actually felt like maybe she was even on drugs. Like she was just kind of really loopy is the best way that I can say it. And so I'm praying, and then all of a sudden, like literally at a moment's notice, she went from being drunk and drugged to being just completely lucid. And I was amazed just to see that it happened. And anyway, that enabled us to go deeper into conversation. She shared some dreams with us. We interpreted them, and then we got to one that was really tender. And this dream, she had a recurring dream where she would get pregnant and she would have an abortion. And that's always the way it went. She would get pregnant, she would have an abortion. She would get pregnant, she would have an abortion. And I just knew that at this point in the conversation, we had built up enough of a relationship that I could actually ask her whether or not this is part of her lived experience. And it wasn't. And I don't normally ask questions like that, but recurring nightmares like that can be because of something that we have done that the enemy wants to torment us about. And she said no. So I knew then that it was entirely metaphorical. And I said something like, well, this dream is basically about new things that are coming into your life, but they're choices that you're making that sabotage it. And so they don't come to fruition. And that led to a whole conversation. And even though that was like really direct, again, we'd had to establish enough of a rapport and enough of a relationship for her to trust us. And so she shared a little bit more of her heart. It felt like the conversation was going to come to an end, and I just had a feeling like there was another dream that was really important for us to hear about. And so I started praying, and all of a sudden in the middle of the conversation, it was like light bulbs went off on her face, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I just remembered a really important dream from my childhood." And so she said this: in my dream, I was 11 years old, and I was playing in my backyard, and Jesus came and he played with me. She's like, it's one of my favorite dreams I've ever had. And I could see on her face how touched she was by it. And again, I don't normally ask questions, but I felt like it was important for us to know as a team, like what had happened when she was 11 years old. And so I asked, and she said, well, I got kicked out of my house. And, in that moment, I just thought, what in the world could an 11-year-old have done to get kicked out of her house? And it just made me realize how difficult her childhood must have been. And so I just said to her, I said, Sarah, I said, I think that this dream was like Jesus visiting you. And he did that because he wanted you to know that he was with you during all of this awful time and that you were having. And she looked at me and she goes, that's what I thought that it meant. and you could see that it touched her. Our conversation went on from there, and she, shared about her spiritual background, which was pretty new agey at this point. She told us that she was going to go to Machu Picchu. She was so dedicated to growing spiritually, and she felt like that was where, like that was going to be kind of a pinnacle experience for her. And, given like where she was at and where we were at, I knew that she likely wasn't going to come to know Jesus, and it didn't even feel like she was ready to have like a really deep conversation about it. And so I just was asking God, like, how can I present Jesus to her in a way that she can receive him, and like, maybe she could just be taken a bit further closer to him. And so we keep talking about her spiritual background. And finally, I said something like this. I said, Sarah, I can see that you're really committed to your spiritual journey. And so much so that you're willing to spend thousands of dollars to go to Machu Picchu. And I said, it's also curious to me that Jesus visited you when you were a child. And I said, Jesus is really spiritual. Like, he's a really spiritual guy. And I got to be honest with you, internally, I was like, God, I know that you are more than just spiritual. Oh my gosh, Jesus, you're King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And I didn't want to reduce him, but I wanted to help her understand, that he was spiritual. And she looked at me and she goes, he is really spiritual. And I looked at her and I said, he's even the master of spirituality. And she put both hands on her hips and she was like, oh my gosh, he is the master. And I said, I bet if you invite Jesus to go with you to Machu Picchu, you're going to be amazed at what he reveals to you. And she just innocently looked up at the heavens and just said, Jesus, will you go with me to Machu Picchu? And I just knew it was a prayer that God was going to answer. Now, at the end of our conversation, she ended up being exactly like she was at the beginning, totally drunk and drugged. And I think that the only reason that happened is because God wanted me to know the miracle that he provided in that window of time where she had that lucidity to be able to connect with us and hear what it is that God wanted to say. But I also want to point out the miracle that Jesus visited her when she was 11 years old and told her in that experience to her heart that he was with her. That is miraculous. So we can't force his hand with these things, but yes, he is a miracle working God. And I invite you to discover more